The loft was silent, save for the echo of boots against polished concrete. It was the kind of silence that pressed down on the chest, thick and unmoving, the kind that belonged not to absence but to aftermath. Detroit police officer Carla Jennings stood frozen at the threshold, her eyes fixed on the horror inside. Maya Ellis, 27, a painter whose bold canvases had begun drawing whispers in the local art scene, lay in pieces on the studio floor. Her once vibrant body, the body that had painted hunger and love into color, was now dismembered. A canvas leaned unfinished on the easel beside her, streaked with furious reds and blacks as though she had tried to capture her own ending. Narration pulled itself into every corner. Maya wasn't just a victim. She was someone who had fought to matter, to be seen. Raised by a single mother in the broken east side of Detroit, she had clawed her way into galleries that once turned her away. People called her brilliant, troubled, too intense. Her work had the weight of confession, and now her death carried the same. The room smelled of paint thinner and iron. In the center of it all, detectives found what would become the case's defining grotesque detail, a folded slip of paper forced inside her body, words scrawled in uneven handwriting. Detective Ray Halverson knelt beside the body, his gloved hands steady but his jaw tight. "This isn't just murder," he muttered. "This is a message." Jennings turned away, bile rising. "Who the hell writes a note like that and leaves it there? That's not anger, Ray, that's control," he finished. His voice cracked like glass under weight. The description painted itself. Police lights bled blue and red across the loft's tall windows, splashing color across Maya's scattered paints, her overturned brushes, the smear of something dark against a canvas she'd never finish. Outside, curious Nei, GH Boers huddled, whispering names, piecing together gossip before facts. Narration again filled the gap. Maya had been alive only the night before. She'd hosted a small gathering, showing friends a new collection she claimed would change everything. There had been wine, laughter, arguments about whether art could save a city like Detroit. Someone left with anger or desire or both. By morning, she was gone. The medical examiner zipped the bag slowly, reverently. Each sound of the teeth closing was another heartbeat silenced. Jennings forced herself to stay rooted, to absorb every detail. A murder this theatrical demanded careful eyes. Dialogue again carried weight. "Someone loved her," Halverson said, staring at the unfinished canvas. "And someone hated her just as much. Sometimes that's the same person." Jennings looked at the canvas too. Thick brushstrokes, jagged, unfinished, the colors raw and bleeding. "Looks like she knew," she whispered. "Like she was painting what was coming." The words hung heavy in the air, impossible to dismiss. Description sharpened. A single light bulb swung faintly overhead, casting shadows across the body bag. The loft seemed smaller now, shrinking under the pressure of secrets. Each streak of paint, each overturned glass, seemed like a clue. Narration carried the scene to its final moment. The note, once removed and sealed, would prove to be the first of many haunting details. It did not name the killer, but it spoke of betrayal, of punishment. The handwriting was rushed, deliberate yet unsteady. Whoever had written it believed themselves righteous. Jennings and Halverson exchanged a glance that marked the beginning of a long descent. What they had wasn't just a body. They had a story wrapped in obsession, art, and lies, and the killer had signed it like a canvas. Outside, the night deepened, Detroit restless and unknowing. Somewhere, a stranger who had watched Maya's every move was already planning their next step. And soon, the detectives would meet the eyes of that stranger. "I see what happened. You accidentally pasted my instructions template back into your message instead of the actual chapter title summary you want me to expand." To move forward, could you please give me the specific chapter title from the outline? For example, Poe, Portrait of a Stranger, or Brushstrokes of Betrayal, so I can expand it into full prose with the correct word count, style, and seamless transition. The investigation pressed deeper into Maya Ellis's private life, peeling back layers of beauty that masked something jagged. The mysterious figure who lingered in the shadows of her gallery shows wasn't the only secret haunting her. In interviews, friends began to speak of her volatility, of how quickly her loyalty turned into mistrust. It was Lena Torres, Maya's closest confidant, who first cracked under the weight of silence. Sitting in the corner of her cluttered apartment, paint-stained coffee mugs scattered on the table, Lena twisted her hands as if wringing out guilt itself. She wanted too much from people, Lena admitted quietly. She wanted them to love her the way she loved her art, completely, without question. But life doesn't work like that. Her voice broke, and the detectives leaned in. What Lena revealed next changed the direction of the case. Maya had been involved in a relationship with Vincent Marrow, a married art dealer with influence across Detroit. What began as opportunity, the promise of gallery placements, exhibitions, collectors' eyes, had quickly tangled into intimacy. Narration wove the scene. Vincent was older, wealthy, practiced in charm. Maya was young, desperate for validation, for someone to assure her she wasn't painting into the void. Their affair had been hidden in shadows, every meeting painted with danger. But beneath the thrill was corrosion, manipulation, whispered threats, promises that always dissolved once the night ended. Description pulled the memory vivid. Lena spoke of nights Maya returned to the loft, mascara streaked, hands trembling. The paint on her canvas would smear as she dragged her brush furiously, colors bleeding into one another until the image collapsed into chaos. Her friends thought it was genius. Lena knew it was pain. Detective Halverson's voice cut through. So she was in love with him? Lena shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping. No, she wanted to be loved. That's not the same thing. Jennings pressed gently. Did she ever say she wanted to end it? She said it every week, Lena whispered. But then he'd show up, and she'd let him in again. He had her trapped, not in chains. Her eyes flicked upward, dark and certain, but in promises. The betrayal sharpened. Not only was Vincent breaking vows to his wife, but Maya was betraying herself, turning her hunger for love into a weapon against her own survival. And Lena, watching from the margins, carried the sting of another betrayal. Being the friend left behind, the confidant who wanted more than just confessions whispered at midnight. Narration lingered on the pattern. Maya had lived her art as if every color was blood, every brushstroke a plea for someone to notice. In Vincent, she thought she'd found her patron, her lover, her salvation. Instead, she found a man with too much to lose, a man who would rather destroy than be exposed. The chapter closed with a chill. Lena's final words carried an unshakable weight. If you're asking who hated her enough to do that, maybe it's the one who loved her the wrong way. The silence after her confession bled into the room, heavy and unmovable. For the first time, Vincent Marrow's name was written not in whispers but in suspicion. And as detectives prepared to bring him in, the shadows of power and obsession grew darker, ready to consume everything in their path. Vincent Marrow did not arrive at the precinct like a guilty man. He walked in polished, his tailored jacket unwrinkled, the kind of man used to commanding rooms rather than answering to them. But beneath the surface calm, detectives recognized the subtle signs, eyes that darted too quickly, fingers that twitched when silence stretched too long. Vincent was no ordinary suspect. He was one of Detroit's most successful art dealers, a man who turned artists into commodities and their pain into price tags. To many, he was savior and benefactor. To Maya Ellis, he had been both lover and jailer. Narration drew the picture clearer. Vincent's career had thrived on possession. Every artist he discovered became another signature in his collection. He didn't just see old paintings, he owned pieces of souls. Those who obeyed flourished. Those who resisted often disappeared from galleries, erased as though they had never mattered. Now, as he sat under fluorescent lights, that hunger for control was more visible than ever. Detective Jennings began carefully. "Mr. Marrow, we've been told you and Maya were close." Vincent leaned back, his smile more performance than sincerity. "I supported her career. She was talented, troubled, like many young artists. But let's not pretend admiration means intimacy." Halverson slid a photograph across the table. Maya and Vincent at a private gala, his hand at her waist, her smile brittle. "This doesn't look like admiration." For the first time, Vincent's mask cracked. He cleared his throat, eyes narrowing. "You have no idea what she was like. She wanted everything. Fame, money, love. She was never satisfied." Jennings' voice was sharp. "So you admit there was a relationship?" He hesitated, then exhaled. "Fine, yes. But it was nothing serious. She was reckless, manipulative. You don't know how many nights I spent dragging her back from disaster." The narration pressed inward. His words weren't a defense, but a confession of power. Vincent framed himself as the savior, the steady hand, while Maya was painted as unstable. It was the same story countless men in power told when accused of exploiting the vulnerable. Description bled into the room. The interrogation chamber smelled faintly of burnt coffee and disinfectant. Shadows from the blinds sliced Vincent's face into fragments, half light, half darkness. His polished cufflinks glimmered under the overhead lamp, as if mocking the gravity of the moment. Halverson studied him quietly. "Where were you the night Maya was killed?" "At home, with my wife," Vincent replied, his voice clipped. Jennings raised an eyebrow. "Does she confirm that?" A pause too long. She was asleep. The silence that followed was a weight all its own. Narration turned to the growing picture. Vincent had motive. Maya had threatened him, Lena had hinted. If Maya exposed their affair, it would scorch his reputation, his empire, his marriage. Men like Vincent did not forgive women who threatened their legacy. But there was something else, something more sinister. Forensics had begun analyzing Maya's private sketches. Many of them featured a faceless figure, tall, suited, hovering like a shadow. Some pages bore words in the margins. "He won't let me go." Jennings thought of those sketches now, staring at Vincent's steady, unnerving gaze. Dialogue returned, sharp as glass. "She was going to leave you, wasn't she?" Jennings asked. Vincent's jaw tightened. "She couldn't leave what she owed. You don't just walk away from someone who's given you everything." The words lingered, bitter and dangerous. As he was escorted out, Vincent straightened his tie as though image could still protect him. But detectives were left with more than suspicion. They had motive, a volatile relationship, and now the first cracks in his alibi. And when the note found inside Maya's body was finally examined, its words would point even deeper into betrayal, towards someone who believed punishment was love and cruelty was justice. The words, once unfolded in the sterile hum of the forensic lab, seemed to echo louder than any confession Vincent Marrow had offered. The paper was cheap, torn from a spiral notebook, its edges jagged like teeth. Black ink, pressed too hard, bled into the fibers, as if the writer's hand had been trembling with rage or righteousness. The note read like a verdict. She betrayed what was given. Faith broken. Love wasted. This is justice. She belongs to me, even in death. Narration deepened the wound. It was not just a message, but a declaration of ownership. Whoever wrote it didn't see Maya Ellis as a woman, an artist, or even a person. She was a possession, a canvas to be punished for daring to color outside the lines of someone else's control. Detective Jennings leaned against the metal counter, her arms crossed tightly. "This isn't Vincent's voice," she said quietly. Halverson studied the page. "You're sure?" She nodded. "Vincent's arrogant, entitled, yes, but he's pragmatic. He'd bury this, not announce it. This is personal. This is obsession." Description sharpened. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, pale and unforgiving, casting the note's dark strokes into sharp relief. Gloves crinkled as the forensic specialist slid the evidence into a clear plastic sleeve, sealing away the words like a venomous insect in glass. The room smelled of latex and antiseptic, but beneath it all clung the phantom of iron, the memory of blood. Narration carried the detective's thoughts further. Vincent's guilt remained a possibility, but the handwriting suggested someone less calculated, more volatile. A lover scorned, a rival consumed by jealousy, someone who believed Maya had betrayed a bond unspoken to the world. Dialogue cut through again, heavy with unease. Halverson muttered, "Justice belongs to me." Whoever wrote this wasn't just angry. They were delusional. They think they're the victim. Jennings looked down at the evidence bag, her voice low. "Then we're not chasing just a killer. We're chasing someone who thinks this is love." The narration lingered on Maya herself, how she'd chased love as if it were salvation, how her hunger to be seen had drawn dangerous eyes. Now, even in death, she was framed not as victim, but as sinner in someone else's twisted scripture. Description cast the final picture. Outside the lab's window, the Detroit skyline loomed, its factories skeletal against the night, smokestacks like unlit candles. Somewhere in that sprawl, the note's author walked free, perhaps already sketching their next words, their next punishment. The detectives knew the voice in the note wasn't silenced. It was only beginning. And the key to understanding it would lie not in Vincent's polished lies, but in the fragments Maya left behind. Her sketchbooks, her hidden drafts, the canvases she never showed anyone. Jennings closed her notebook with finality. Let's see what Maya was trying to tell us before she died. Maybe her art was the only place she felt safe to speak. And with that, the investigation shifted, away from Vincent's denials and toward the secrets buried in the lines and brushstrokes of Maya's unfinished work. The loft had been scoured once already, every drawer opened, every surface dusted for prints. But detectives returned with sharper eyes, guided by the words of the note, "She belongs to me." They began to search not for evidence of a break-in, but for the story Maya had left behind. It was Jennings who found the sketchbook. Hidden beneath a false bottom in a wooden crate, it was bound in cracked leather, its pages thick with graphite and paint stains. The book smelled faintly of turpentine and something more intimate, like the ghost of her hands still clinging to the paper. Narration unrolled her secret world. The first pages were studies, ordinary sketches of streets, portraits of strangers she passed on buses. But as the detectives turned further, the images darkened. Over and over again, Maya had drawn the outline of a man, tall, faceless, suited in shadows. Sometimes he stood over her bed, sometimes behind her easel, sometimes faceless no longer but blurred, as though her hand trembled at the thought of completing him. Halverson frowned, his gloved fingers pausing on a sketch where the faceless figure's hands circled Maya's throat. In the margin, her handwriting scrawled, "He won't let me go." Jennings felt the chill tighten along her spine. This isn't art. This is a diary. Description sharpened. The loft's wide windows let in pale afternoon light, illuminating the sketches in stark detail. Dust motes drifted like ash across the paper. Maya's colors, once vibrant and alive, were muted here. Grays, blacks, bruised purples, violent reds. Each drawing was less a picture and more a scream captured in silence. Dialogue followed, heavy with implication. Halverson muttered, "This doesn't look like Vincent. He thrives at and control, yes, but this feels unhinged, chaotic, dangerous." Jennings studied another page. Maya, sitting in front of an easel, her head lowered. Behind her, the faceless man painted over her canvas, blotting out her work. The caption beneath read, "He paints over me." Jennings whispered, "This is someone else. Someone she couldn't name." The narration stretched wider. Maya's affair with Vincent was real, but this sketchbook revealed a deeper terror. There had been another presence in her life. Someone outside the spotlight, someone she couldn't expose without risking everything. An unknown lover, rival, or stalker who blurred the line between inspiration and imprisonment. Description shifted to the detective's mood. The air grew heavier with every turned page, each revelation thickening the silence. Outside, traffic rumbled faintly on the Detroit streets, life continuing oblivious, while inside the loft it felt as though the walls themselves pressed inward, holding secrets too large to contain. Jennings closed the book carefully, her voice low. She knew she was being watched. Maybe she even let it happen at first. But at some point it became a prison. She was painting her fear because she couldn't speak it. Halverson nodded grimly. Then the note fits. Betrayal, justice, possession. Whoever wrote it saw her as theirs. And when she strayed, when she reached for Vincent, maybe even someone else, they punished her. Narration carried the chilling logic. The killer's note was not random. It was the echo of Maya's own art, the faceless man stepping from canvas into flesh. The book wasn't just evidence, it was prophecy. Jennings bagged the sketchbook with steady hands. This changes everything. We've been looking at Vincent as the monster in her life. But maybe he was just one shadow among many. Dialogue cut once more, final and heavy. Then who's the man without a face? Halverson asked. Jennings met his eyes. We find him, or he'll find someone else. The description closed the scene. Outside the loft, the city lights flickered on as dusk settled. The skyline sharpened against the dying sun, long shadows stretching like arms across broken streets. Somewhere in that sprawl, the faceless figure existed, not in charcoal or paint, but in flesh and obsession. And as the detectives prepared to follow the trail, Lena Torres was waiting to reveal her own piece of Maya's story, one that would turn suspicion in an entirely new direction. Lena Torres had avoided the detectives for days, answering calls with clipped excuses, turning grief into distance. But when Jennings and Halverson knocked at her door again, carrying Maya's sketchbook sealed in plastic, she finally cracked. Her apartment was small, cluttered with canvases of her own, unfinished landscapes leaning against walls, ashtrays overflowing, the air heavy with smoke and turpentine. Lena sat on the couch, hair pulled into a messy knot, her eyes bloodshot. She looked less like a friend in mourning and more like someone on the edge of confession. Narration pulled the scene tighter. Lena had been Maya's anchor, the person who cleaned up the broken glasses after drunken arguments, who dragged her home when nights went too far. But anchors rust too, and beneath Lena's loyalty simmered a resentment she couldn't hide. Jennings placed the sketchbook gently on the table. We found this in Maya's loft. She was drawing someone she couldn't name. You knew her better than anyone. Who was he? Lena's hands shook as she reached for a cigarette. She didn't light it, just held it like a shield. You think Vincent was her only secret? She said bitterly. No. Maya collected secrets the way she collected colors. Halverson leaned forward. Tell us. Description sharpened. The lamplight flickered in Lena's cramped living room, casting restless shadows over the canvases stacked behind her. Rain tapped against the window, soft but relentless, like the rhythm of something breaking down. Finally, Lena exhaled. His name was Ezra Kane, an artist, if you can call him that. He painted in basements, in warehouses, on walls nobody asked for. He wasn't like Vincent. He didn't want to own her work. He wanted to own her. Narration carried the weight. Ezra Kane was part of Detroit's underground scene, a painter known for chaos and fire. His exhibitions weren't in galleries but in abandoned buildings, lit by stolen lamps and cigarettes. He was talented, yes, but volatile, an artist who treated destruction as creation. Lena's voice cracked as she went on. She met him when Vincent started pulling away. He was everything she thought Vincent wasn't. Young, reckless, dangerous. At first, she said he understood her, that he painted with the same kind of rage she felt. But it turned fast. He didn't just want her love. He wanted her fear. Jennings asked carefully, "Did he hurt her?" Lena looked down at her trembling hands. Not with bruises. He didn't have to. He knew how to twist her mind. He'd tell her she wasn't enough, then beg her never to leave. She'd call me crying, then run back to him the next day. It was a cycle she couldn't break. Dialogue tightened the air. She ever say she was scared for her life? Halverson pressed. Lena's eyes glistened. She said he'd never let her go, that if she tried, he'd make sure nobody else had her. She thought it was passion. I think it was a threat. Narration sealed the revelation. The faceless figure in Maya's sketches, the words scribbled in margins. He paints over me. It was Ezra Kane, not Vincent Marrow, who haunted her canvases. Description closed the scene. Outside Lena's window, nay, on lights from a liquor store blurred in the rain, casting streaks of red and green across the glass like smeared paint. The city seemed complicit, its shadows swallowing secrets whole. Jennings rose slowly, her expression grim. Then Ezra Kane needs to answer some questions. And as the detectives prepared to track him down, they didn't yet know that Ezra's world was built not on canvases, but on obsession, and stepping into it would mean confronting the kind of rage that left no one untouched. Detective Jennings had heard the name before, whispered in dive bars and buried in police reports that rarely saw daylight. Ezra Kane. He was a phantom in Detroit's underground art world, a man as elusive as he was destructive. Where Vincent Marrow thrived on prestige and wealth, Ezra thrived on ruin. Narration carried the weight of discovery. Kane's art was not meant for galleries. His canvases were burned plywood, broken mirrors, graffiti smeared across forgotten factories. His shows, if they could be called that, were rituals of chaos. Crowds gathered not to admire, but to survive the experience. Smoke, fire, and the unshakable sense that Kane's work bled from wounds that were never his own. Jennings and Halverson drove through the rain-slicked streets, Lena's trembling confession replaying in their minds. Maya hadn't just been torn between love and ambition. She had been caught in a war of men who saw her not as a person, but as a vessel for their obsessions. Description sharpened. The detective's car cut through the city's neon glow, steam rising from sewer grates, billboards flickering like broken signals. Detroit at night felt like Ezra Kane himself, fractured, restless, and waiting to strike. They found his name scrawled across a police database. Arrests for trespassing, vandalism, disturbing the peace. Nothing that stuck. Always released, always slipping back into the shadows. A man whose danger wasn't recorded in bruises, but in whispers. Dialogue tightened the moment. Halverson tapped the screen. He's a ghost. No address, no employer, just abandoned warehouses and late-night arrests. Jennings frowned. Ghosts leave traces. We'll find his. The deeper they dug, the darker the picture became. Witnesses described Ezra as magnetic, the kind of man who pulled people into his orbit and left them scorched. One former girlfriend, her name redacted in the report, had written, "He made me believe destruction was love." Another described waking to find words carved into her wall. Mine. Narration pressed harder. Maya had stepped into his orbit at the very moment Vincent's neglect pushed her toward hunger for recognition. Ezra filled that void, not with care, but with intensity so suffocating it masqueraded as devotion. Jennings whispered as if to herself, "He didn't just want Maya's art. He wanted to erase her with it." They drove to one of his rumored haunts, an abandoned steel mill on the edge of the city. Inside, the air smelled of rust and gasoline. Candles melted into rivers of wax lined the walls. Spray-painted words screamed across metal beams. "No one leaves." Description painted the scene. The detective's flashlights sliced through darkness, catching shattered bottles, paint-stained rags, canvases slashed in violent strokes. One corner revealed a mural, half finished, half erased. At the center was a woman's outline. The face had been scraped away until only raw wall remained. Halverson muttered, "He paints her, then destroys her." Jennings crouched, tracing the flakes of paint on the floor. Not just her, all of them. Every woman he's ever pulled in. Dialogue deepened tension. Halverson's jaw tightened. And Maya was the latest. Jennings answered, "The latest, or the one who finally refused to be erased." Narration closed in. The evidence wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough to confirm what Lena had feared. Ezra Kane wasn't simply a rival artist. He was a predator who weaponized creation and destruction, binding women to him until they broke. Description ended the chapter in unease. As the detectives stepped back into the rain, the steel mill loomed behind them, its windows shattered, its skeleton hollow. Shadows shifted in the distance, too fast to catch. Whether real or imagined, the sense was undeniable. Ezra Kane was watching, and he knew they were closing in. Jennings lit a cigarette with trembling hands. He won't stay in the shadows for long. And with that, the hunt for Ezra Kane began. Not just for justice, but to uncover the darkest layer of Maya's final days. The steel mill still clung to Jennings's jacket in the form of rust and soot as she stared down the file on Ezra Kane. But it wasn't just Ezra's name that surfaced. It was another one, scratched in the margins of multiple reports. Darren Colt, a known drug dealer, occasional fence for stolen goods, and, most damningly, Ezra's closest confidant. Narration wove the connection. Colt wasn't an artist. He was the underbelly that fed artists like Ezra the chaos they thrived on. He provided the substances, the cash, the connections to keep Kane's world spinning. And if Maya had fallen into Ezra's orbit, it was almost certain she'd brushed against Colt's as well. Description framed the setting. Jennings and Halverson pulled up to a strip of half-collapsed row houses, their headlights bouncing across broken glass and graffiti. In the center of the block, a single unit glowed faintly. Colt's hideout. Music thumped faintly inside, bass heavy, a heartbeat of menace. They knocked. No answer. Halverson pounded harder. At last, the door opened to reveal Darren Colt, thin, twitchy, eyes darting like a cornered anima, while dialogue snapped the tension. Halverson. "Darren Colt?" Colt smirked. "Depends who's asking." Jennings flashed her badge. "Detective Jennings, this is Halverson. We need to talk about Maya Laurent." At the sound of her name, Colt's smirk faltered. His gaze flicked to the side to a table littered with rolled bills and white powder. Jennings pushed. "We know Ezra Kane leaned on you. We know you supplied his shows, and we know Maya was with him. Tell us what you saw." Narration pressed into Colt's silence. Fear wasn't unfamiliar to him, but this was different. Maya's name carried weight. It wasn't the fear of cops. It was the fear of Ezra's shadow. Finally, he muttered, "She didn't belong in his world. Too clean, too pure. Ezra liked to break things. You know that, right? He thought breaking them made them real." Jennings leaned forward. And you watched him? Description tightened. Colt's fingers drummed nervously against the table, the dim light casting deep hollows under his eyes. A drop of sweat slid down his temple despite the cold air. Colt whispered, "I didn't just watch. I helped." The words landed heavy. Dialogue revealed the fracture. Halverson. Helped how? Colt. He said she needed to feel weightless, unchained. He gave her lines, drinks, whatever she wanted. But it wasn't about the high. It was about control. He wanted her pliable, soft clay in his hands. Jennings's jaw tightened. So you drugged her? Colt looked away, voice cracking. She asked sometimes, but Ezra pushed it. He'd sit there staring, waiting until she gave in, and He stopped, choking on the words. I put it in her hands. I knew what I was doing. Narration pulled the confession wider. Colt wasn't a killer, but he was an accomplice to Maya's unraveling. He'd watched as Ezra's obsession consumed her, as her art turned frantic, fragmented, soaked with darkness. He had sold the very tools Ezra used to bend her spirit until it cracked. Description closed in. Jennings noticed a canvas shoved half under the couch. She pulled it free. A portrait smeared in frantic strokes. Maya's face, blurred, fading, her eyes black voids. The signature was Ezra's, but the stain at the bottom corner wasn't paint. Blood. Jennings's voice dropped to a whisper. Where did you get this? Colt buried his face in his hands. He left it here the night she disappeared. Told me to, keep it safe. Said it was her final canvas. Dialogue cut sharp. Halverson. So he bragged. He told you he was done with her. Colt's voice cracked. He said she was his masterpiece, and that no one would ever touch her again. Narration sealed the truth. Colt wasn't just a dealer with dirty hands. He was a silent witness, complicit in the spiral that ended with Maya's death. And now his confession placed Ezra Kane at the center of the crime, not just as a lover, but as the architect of her destruction. Description ended the chapter with dread. Outside, police sirens wailed faintly, swallowed by the city's dark hum. Colt slumped against the wall, muttering apologies that meant nothing. Jennings and Halverson exchanged a look, both knowing the path was set. Ezra Kane was no longer a shadow. He was the storm, and they were walking straight into its eye. Ezra Kane was the monster everyone wanted to see behind bars. Colt's confession, the blood-stained canvas, the stories of manipulation, they painted him as the architect of Maya Laurent's downfall. Yet one piece refused to fit, an ugly shard in the mosaic of truth, the note found in Maya's body. Narration carried the unease. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, words carved in menace. She was never yours. Investigators assumed Ezra had left it, the final signature of his obsession. But as the lab results returned, Jennings sat in stunned silence. The DNA on the paper edges wasn't Ezra Kane's. Description set the moment. The fluorescent lights of the precinct hummed overhead, drowning the silence in sterile white. Jennings flipped through the report, her finger lingering on the highlighted line. Partial match to Vincent Marrow. Dialogue struck like a blade. Halverson. Vincent? That doesn't make sense. He distanced himself from her months ago. Jennings. Or that's what he wanted everyone to believe. Narration sharpened. Vincent Marrow, the polished gallery owner, the patron who had discovered Maya, the man whose neglect supposedly pushed her toward Ezra, had left a fingerprint in the most intimate, brutal clue of all. The note wasn't Ezra's. It was his. Jennings revisited the timeline. While Ezra consumed Maya with obsession, Vincent remained in the background, a figure of respectability, But art was power, and Maya had become more than Vincent's protege. She was his rival. Her rising acclaim had outshone his carefully curated empire. Description framed Vincent's duality. The face he showed to Detroit's art world was impeccable. Tailored suits, polished smiles, benefactor of starving artists. But in Jennings's mind, that image now warped, peeling like cheap paint. Underneath was jealousy, desperation, and perhaps something darker. Dialogue unfolded suspicion. Halverson: "So what are we saying? Ezra broke her down, but Vincent finished the job?" Jennings: "Or they both played their parts. Ezra destroyed her spirit. Vincent erased her body. One fed on obsession, the other on control." Narration deepened the fracture. The idea of two men tethered to Maya's fate was unbearable but undeniable. Ezra wanted her consumed, possessed. Vincent wanted her silenced, erased before her brilliance eclipsed him. The note wasn't a lover's cry, it was a competitor's dagger. Jennings traced the words in her mind. She was never yours. Not Ezra's words to Vincent. Vincent's words to Ezra. A message meant to wound, to claim the final stroke of ownership over Maya's broken life. Description pulled closer. Rain streaked the precinct windows, smearing city lights into blurred halos. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, each drop a reminder that truth wasn't clean. It bled, it smeared, it destroyed the image you thought you saw. They brought Vincent in. His demeanor was polished as always, though a flicker of irritation crossed his face at being summoned. Dialogue cracked his veneer. "Vincent, this is absurd. Ezra Kane is your man. Everyone knows he's unstable." Jennings: "Unstable doesn't mean alone. We have your DNA on the note, inside Maya's body." Vincent's composure faltered. "That's impossible. I hadn't seen her in weeks." Halverson: "Then explain the evidence. Explain the words. She was never yours. Who were you talking to?" Narration dissected the silence. Vincent's jaw clenched. His hand twitched against the table. He didn't answer, but his stillness was louder than any denial. The gallery owner, the patron saint of young artists, was cornered, and Jennings felt the chill of a truth too big for a single suspect. Description framed the interrogation room. Harsh light above, walls closing in, the glass behind which other officers watched. Vincent looked smaller than he ever had, stripped of charm, his suit a costume slipping at the seams. Jennings whispered, more to herself than to him. "Two men, two shadows, and Maya caught between them." Vincent finally spoke, voice low, almost trembling. "You think Ezra killed her because he loved her, but you're wrong. He destroyed her because he couldn't stand losing her. I only wanted to remind him she was mine first." Dialogue cut sharp. Halverson: "Remind him? Or remind yourself?" Vincent's silence was the only answer. Narration sealed the revelation. Ezra Kane had left bruises on Maya's soul. But Vincent Marrow had left the note, the final desecration, turning her death into a grotesque battlefield between men who wanted ownership over what they could never truly possess. Description closed the chapter. Outside, thunder cracked above the city, the storm splitting the night. In the echo of that sound, Jennings knew the case was no longer about one killer. It was about unraveling a web of obsession, rivalry, and betrayal that had consumed Maya long before her final breath. And the path forward was clear. To prove whose hands delivered the fatal blow, they would have to drag both men into the light. The note had cracked everything open, but Jennings knew there was more. A single scrap of paper didn't tell the whole story. It only revealed the ugliness beneath. To solve Maya Laurent's death, they had to return to the beginning, to the one place where every secret bled into sight: her studio. Narration carried the detectives back through the rain-slicked streets, to the loft that once pulsed with Maya's restless energy. It was less a home than a living diary, every wall and canvas whispering her dissent. Ezra Kane's violence and Vincent Marrow's envy were threads, but the tapestry of her end was painted by Maya herself. Description anchored the scene. The loft was cold, abandoned since the crime scene tape had been removed. Paint tubes lay scattered, canvases leaned drunkenly against walls. Dust hung in the air like faded sunlight. In the center stood the easel where Maya's final work waited, draped with a cloth the investigators had never lifted. Jennings hesitated, then pulled it away. Narration deepened. Beneath the cloth was not a portrait of Ezra or Vincent, but of herself. Maya, fragmented across the canvas, her body split into jagged shards, her face half-formed, her hands stretching outward, clawing for escape. The background wasn't empty. It was filled with shadows. Two of them, indistinct but unmistakable, looming. Dialogue broke the silence. Halverson whispered, "She painted her own ending." Jennings's voice was low, steady. "No, she painted her prison, and the men who built it." They searched deeper, turning over sketchbooks, scraps of notes, recordings buried in a small handheld device found beneath a stack of canvases. When Jennings pressed play, Maya's voice filled the empty room. Her confession was not to the police, not even to her friends. It was to herself. Narration delivered her words. Maya spoke of Ezra's intoxicating fire, how he made her believe destruction was love. She spoke of Vincent's manipulation, how he praised her talent, yet feared its light. And between them, she spoke of drowning, caught in the currents of obsession and betrayal. Her voice cracked in the recording. "If I vanish, know it wasn't by choice. They'll say it was passion. They'll say it was art. But it was neither. It was possession." Description painted the detectives' faces in the dim light of the loft, shadows pulling at their expressions as they listened. Maya's voice was fragile yet defiant, the sound of a woman who knew her cage had no door. Dialogue pressed the gravity. Halverson, "This is it. This ties them both. Ezra destroyed her spirit. Vincent silenced her body." Jennings shook her head. "It's more than evidence. It's testimony. She wanted the world to know the truth, even if her voice was stolen." Narration drew the net tighter. The recording, the painting, the note, each piece formed a mosaic of guilt. Ezra Kane's obsession had hollowed Maya, driving her deeper into despair. Vincent Marrow's pride had finished what Ezra began, leaving her body desecrated with a note meant to wound. Together they had taken her life, not in a single strike, but in 1,000 cuts. Description framed the decision. The detectives stood at the window of the loft, looking out over the city that had chewed Maya up and spit her out. Neon lights blurred in the rain, painting the glass in streaks of red, green, and blue, like her final palette, smeared across the night. Jennings turned from the window, her voice resolute. "We bring them both in. No more shadows, no more games. The canvas tells the truth, and the truth will bury them." The arrests came quickly. Ezra was cornered in another warehouse, his hands stained with paint and blood he swore wasn't his. Scent was pulled from his gallery, his mask of civility crumbling as cameras flashed, reporters shouting the name he could no longer polish into perfection. Narration closed the circle. Detroit had its answers, but the answers were not clean. They never were. Maya Laurent was gone, consumed by men who mistook possession for love, betrayal for art, obsession for passion. The city mourned, the headlines screamed, and her final painting, The Truth Beneath the Canvas, was sealed in evidence, too raw for public eyes. Description ended with haunting weight. In the loft, silent once more, the smell of turpentine lingered. Dust settled over unfinished canvases, brushes hardened in jars of stagnant water. But on the wall, faint and almost hidden, were words scrawled in Maya's own hand. I am not theirs. I am mine. Jennings read them aloud in the echoing space, and for the first time in weeks, the case felt less like justice and more like release. A voice reclaimed, a truth finally set free. The storm outside broke into dawn, and with it, Maya's shadow lifted, leaving behind only the truth she had always known, buried beneath the canvas. The arrests shook Detroit's art world to its core. Vincent Marrow, once a darling of galleries and collectors, was led away in handcuffs from his pristine, white-walled empire. Ezra Kane, wild-eyed and paint-stained, screamed curses as he was dragged from the warehouse that had served as both his studio and his stage. Two men who had shaped and destroyed Maya Laurent's world were finally exposed under the same light she had once craved.